All right. All right. Welcome to tonight's program. It is a real pleasure to join you from Connecticut. So, we are trying to figure out exactly how I made my way into the Medfield, Massachusetts Library circulation. And it was really just, I think, a little bit of spread of social media combined with another library or bookstore program that I did, and, a couple of sisters or family members. And then all at once, it's making its way to another state. And that's a cool thing for me to see. I have a vision about how we as Americans and humans fuel ourselves and take care of ourselves. And it's really cool to see the message spreading little by little, surely, but very slowly. So I'm Dr. Katie, and I'm an integrative medicine physician in Connecticut. So integrative medicine is that beautiful mixture of regular Western medicine along with evidence-based Eastern modalities. So things like acupuncture, herbs, teaching patients the value of nutrition and how to take care of themselves. Obviously, discussing things like sleep and exercise, as well as how we're taking care of our spiritual selves, using herbs instead of medications, those kinds of things. And it's really, honestly, a lot of fun. I got here into medicine like in a very beautiful way. When I was a child, I grew up, no joke, in the cornfields of Northwest Ohio. And I was the daughter of a family physician who is still in operation these days, solo doctor in our little town of 7,000 people at his practice about a mile from my house. And when I was growing up, it wasn't uncommon that I would be, washing cars on a Saturday afternoon with my dad and my brothers, and someone would roll up in a pickup truck and, have a big gash or something kind of emergent going on. And the closest emergency room was 30 or 40 minutes drive. And so they would come to Dr. Wary's to get stitched up. And when I was, I don't know, probably 9 or 10 years old, my dad allowed me to go along, and I became his assistant on the weekends when he was over there. And as soon as I kind of got over the blood and guts part of it, I realized I really loved medicine. I really loved helping people, and that was what I wanted to do with my life. So I went to the University of Michigan for undergrad, and I went to the business school there because I knew that I needed to major in something, and business was really interesting to me. And I liked the way that it made my mind work. And when I went into medical school at Wright State in Ohio, I did a combined MD MBA program. And so I spent 5 years there doing medical stuff and then also getting an MBA. And it was a really like lovely experience, except that when you are, compared to the cream of the crop, I had that at Michigan for sure. But when I got to med school and I was really amongst a lot of smart people, I just realized the stakes were raised. And over the course of time, I noticed that my own anxiety started to go up. And for the first time in my whole life, I found myself not hungry because I thought everything tasted like the formaldehyde the um, of the med school anatomy lab. And I wasn't sleeping very well, and really found myself in this my first sort of space of anxiousness. And then when the ante was put up again, when I went to residency at Columbia in the city in family medicine, I really started to struggle with anxiety, and how it really manifested for me was in my sleep. And I went to go see my primary care doctor. And around the same time, I really wanted to have children, and my period wasn't very regular. And I went to see my doctor and just sort of talked about how stressed I was feeling. And he was one of the first doctors I'd ever worked with who listened and really was able to sit with me in my space of discomfort and hear what I was saying and acknowledge it. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that we can do for another human, whether we're a doctor or not, is just acknowledge someone's path and say, like, hey, that is really hard. And he recommended that I see his wife's acupuncturist. And I'd never tried acupuncture before, but it was a really, really wonderful experience. And I remember being on the acupuncture table thinking, I've got to bring this kind of medicine to other people. At the same time, I stopped eating hospital food and I started packing my lunch. which was revolutionary to my digestion. I started sleeping as much as possible, and sometimes, wouldn't choose to do social events just because I was so tired, and I would sleep as much as I could. And I also started yoga, and for the first time, really understood what it meant to pay attention to the real spiritual self that lives deep inside. And I discovered my own integrative medicine. And fast forward 10 years later, now I'm in Connecticut doing this for a living, and I love it. The book itself, Plants First, is so much about my distillation of knowledge to someone who just wants to do a good job. And I recognize that we all can't be perfect all the time. I can't be perfect either. And so I adopt really the 80-20 philosophy when it comes to life, which is that we need to do a really, really bang up job 80% of the time. And then 20% we don't have to worry so much about. And if you're a sensitive little bear, maybe it's 85-15, or maybe it's 90-10, or maybe you have a really solid constitution and it's 75-25. Whatever. You can do whatever feels good to you. But I would say most of us feel good when we make really solid decisions 80% of the time. So when I'm thinking about the solid decisions, and I think about this a lot, even if my own life kind of like gets out of balance, right? Because you can't always stay in balance. Sometimes things just happen. Life is stressful at times. And whenever I find myself like not really feeling well, I really ask myself, how are you doing with the 4 pillars? And Dr. Katie's 4 pillars are: how are you eating? How are you moving? How are you sleeping? And how are you paying attention to your spiritual self? And usually we can, find one space or maybe 2 spaces that we're not like doing such a great job at. And that's where I start to focus my energies when my body's feeling out of balance. When it comes to nutrition, which we'll talk about at length, because that's really the crux of Plants First, we really need to be making a plant forward choice 80% of the time. And I'm going to come back to that because it's a huge topic, but let's talk about the others real quick too. It was important when I wrote this book, when I talked to the publishers about my vision, that it not just be a doctor's view of a plant forward diet. That's what they wanted. But what I wanted to give them was a really well-rounded, integrative view of life, because that's how I think about health and wellness. So first, let's talk about movement. Everybody needs to move their body every day. We eat every day, we sleep every day. We probably need to move our bodies every day. One of the doctors that I follow said something really funny, and I thought this was such a good idea, that really it's a 2 + 2 + 2, and then 1 extra thing. And his whole thing was 2 things a week that strengthen your muscles, 2 days a week doing something that strengthens your heart, meaning like a nice cardio activity, 2 times a week doing something that challenges your balance, and then 1 thing a week that you do that's just fun and kind of incorporates all of them. So in my life, the way that sort of manifests itself is 2 days a week, I do some strength training. A couple days a week, I go on walks, usually with friends or talking to people that from college or just people that I want to catch up with. 2 days a week, I do yoga, sometimes 3. And on the last day, I try to choose something fun that just feels good to me in that rhythm. So I would encourage you to think about a little bit of movement, 20 to 30 minutes a day. It really matters if it can be outside. There's great science to support the idea of green exercise, meaning exercise that happens outside of the house, because that's extra nourishing to the nervous system. And I always say, we all know that exercise is really good for your cardiovascular system. But the number 1 reason to exercise, really, in my mind, is for stress management. And I know that that if I exercise my own life, it's really as effective. And the studies are showing this too. It's really as effective as taking an SSRI, something like Lexapro or Zoloft. And I feel that in my life. I feel that positivity, and I can tell when I'm not being as faithful to my exercise as I want to be. So it doesn't matter what time of day you exercise, and it doesn't matter that it all comes at one fell swoop. You can exercise in 5-minute chunks, 10-minute chunks. You can do it in the morning, or you can do it after you eat. You can do it not too close to bed, but within 3 hours of bed or so is totally fine. But any time of day that and any activity that makes you move your body is a good one. So that's exercise, and we can talk more about this in the Q&A. The next pillar is sleep, and sleep is a really tricky one, especially as we get older. And I think a lot of people have unrealistic expectations when it comes to sleep because sleep really does change as we get older. It becomes more difficult to stay asleep. We don't sleep like teenagers where we sleep, 8 hours or 9 hours at a time. Um, excuse me. And so we often have these very unrealistic expectations about how we're going to sleep. And as soon as we lower the bar on the expectations, often sleep is a little bit more easy to come. One of the most difficult parts about sleep is that I'm going to mute my mic for 1 second, just take a bigger gulp of water. 1 second. Truth in advertising. I had some chocolate before I popped on here. And I think sometimes the chocolate just irritates the throat a little bit. Um, but I think that sleep is really challenging, and one of the most difficult issues is really getting the body to calm down after a full days of activity. So sleep is really something that just happens to us. It's a relinquishing, it's a letting go. And if you talk to people who don't have any sleep issues and you ask them like, well, how do you fall asleep? They're like, I don't know, I just do. And you want to punch them in the face. But if you have sleep issues, you know that you like try to fall asleep, but it's not something you can try to do. It's just something that happens. And the problem is we live a very, very busy life. And often we are really in fight or flight mode for most of the day, running to and from things, activities, work, school, home, attending to elder parents, whatever is going on in our lives. And when we're busy all day long, it is really hard for our brain to just whoop, be able to go into sleep. So we really need to spend a bit of time in the evening relaxing into rest. And there's a 3-2-1 rule that I think that's really helpful for sleep. And the 3-2-1 is 3 hours before bed, no heavy meals. 2 hours before bed, no work. 1 hour before bed, no devices. And if you start to follow that way of thinking, you don't have to be super rigid about it, but it's a good suggestion. And you start to get into that place of actually relaxing in the evening and relinquishing to rest. And that's really important for us because our brains are like dishwashers, and all day long we're having a party. And at some point in time, we have to run the dishwasher and do the dishes. We can't party all the time. And most of us really want to be in the party mode, the get it done kind of mode. And that just doesn't happen all of the time. But you don't have to be a slave to your bedtime routine. You can take the 80-20 philosophy to the bedtime routine as well. So if you want to spend some extra time with friends on the weekends and do fun things and not go to bed exactly at 10 a.m. or 10 p.m., that's totally fine. But you do need to honor your sleep rhythm and get up, go to bed mostly the same time throughout the week. We call that social jet lag, which is when we sort of travel to California in our time zone by staying out late and then trying to sleep it off. But at some point in time, we end up shortchanging our sleep. And there's some really, really good literature written about sleep. And one book I really loved, which I highly recommend, probably is at your library, is this book called Why We Sleep, written by Matthew Walker. And he talks a lot about what happens during sleep and why it's so important. And the first half of the night, we actually are pruning out. Oh, thank you so much. We're pruning out all of the stuff that we learned during the day that we don't need to remember. So right now I'm wearing a blue-gray shirt. You don't need to remember that for the rest of your life. So when you go to bed tonight, your brain's going to prune that out. And then it's going to take everything you do need to know, like something you memorized today that you have to remember, and it's going to take that and take it from the short-term memory to the long-term memory. So if you shortchange your sleep on the front end by waking up too early, then you're going to miss out on that solidification. And if you go to bed too late, you're going to miss out on some of that pruning. So I always say some of the best advice for people who are studying or in school is to make sure that they get the proper amount of rest, because if you're shortchanging on either end, you're going to miss some of the pruning, or you're going to miss some of that long-term storage, and that's not helpful to anyone, no matter what you're trying to remember through the day. So that's a little bit of stuff on sleep. The next pillar is spirituality, and this was a really tricky one and a hard one to talk about without a religious context. But I always say I don't care what religion or not anybody is. I only care that you are attentive to your spiritual self. that very deep part of you that lives inside that needs nurturing on a regular basis. And the reason for that is because we all have a nervous system called the autonomic nervous system that runs in the background always. And we don't have really any control of it. It's automatic. But there are two pieces of it. There's the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And the parasympathetic is the rest and digest response. It's what allows us to relax, allows us to absorb nutrients from our food and go to the bathroom and do all the things in our life that are like more low key. Then the opposite of that is the sympathetic response, which is the fight or flight or freeze response. And this is what many of us are operating in a lot of the time. We're constantly putting out fires at work or at home or with our parents or with our kids or whatever the situation may be. And we kind of feel a little frenetic or frantic going from thing to thing. And we're not running from saber-toothed tigers anymore, but our immune systems, our nervous systems, our whole bodies feel like we are. And so it's no wonder that people have difficulty going to the bathroom, difficulty sleeping, difficulty with pain or other issues. It's because the nervous system is all jacked up. And so what we do in connecting to our spiritual selves is trying to balance out that nervous system. So instead of so much fight or flight, that we actually bring the fight or flight down by increasing the parasympathetic, the rest and digest response. And anytime that you get into a meditative space, whether you're praying, whether you are just breathing, whether you're doing a meditation app on, or a meditation through the Peloton app, it doesn't matter. What's happening in your brain is you are short circuiting the wiring that's constantly running, that's constantly in that sort of like daydreaming / thinking brain, the one that's not helpful, the one that's perseverating about the past or forecasting incorrectly about the future. It's not in the present. And when you are in the present doing some kind of meditation activity, you short circuit that brain. And studies are conclusive that it correlates, the more time we spend in the present moment, correlates to increased happiness. And who doesn't want increased happiness in their lives? And so one of the best ways is just to spend a bit of time every day doing something that is present focused. And for me, the way that it happens in my life is my alarm goes off in the morning and I push snooze for 9 minutes. And for 9 minutes, I just let go of the crazy monkey brain that's ready to solve all the patient problems and figure out all the world's ails, and actually just come back to the present moment. And I find it's really helps me feel more like myself and also probably behave a little bit more nicely to my family. It's something I started doing a couple of years ago. And because it's only 9 minutes, it's such a small amount of my day. It seems really doable. And then I do yoga a couple of times a week because I really love movement. I really love my yoga teacher. And I love being able to pop on Zoom from my attic and do some mindful movement, because I often find over the arc of 45 minutes to an hour, like my whole world shifts. Things that seem so complicated somehow come into focus, and I'm able to be a bit more objective about them, even when I feel overwhelmed. So if yoga or Tai Chi or some kind of movement-based meditation feels good to you, I would definitely encourage you to do that. Like I said, the studies are so good and conclusive that people live longer, happier lives. All right, so now the crux of the book, Plants First. I have my copy right here. You can see this beautiful salad. This picture was actually shot in my dining room. Would you believe it? All the photography for the book was shot in my house during COVID. It was a crazy time that I wrote this book. And all of the recipes for this book were actually made by friends of mine. So when I knew that I had to shoot the photography for this book, I knew there was no way I was going to get through 40 plus recipes and photograph them. So I called upon my community and I reached out, and 25 of my very dear friends and neighbors who live just around the corner from me volunteered to make the recipes. So they all got trialed by home cooks, and every single picture in here, it doesn't matter if it's sweet and savory butternut squash porridge, like that was made by my friend Aparna. Isn't it gorgeous? And it showed up at my doorstep in 15-minute intervals. And then a couple of my friends, my sisters, were inside and we were zhuzhing up the things, and then it would get photographed. which is kind of fun to think that this really was a community effort in the midst of COVID. But the crux of the book, Plants First, is that really we should be living more plant forward lifestyles. And the idea is that we don't need to do that 100% of the time. We just need to be pretty diligent about it 80% of the time. The way I like to think about it is really prioritizing in our diets fiber, fat, and protein in the right ratio. And fiber is the best thing ever. That's why we eat plants. So fiber, I always say, is your best friend. It does three things. It goes through your blood vessels like a squeegee. It goes through your digestion like a broom and helps you have regular bowel movements. And it keeps your blood sugar stable. And this is the key, friends, because keeping your blood sugar stable is the reason that we are able to stave off things like diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol problems, and all their terrible complications on the back end. And so really thinking about fiber in your diet is key. And that's what makes things like, brown rice and quinoa different than, say, brown rice pasta or quinoa crackers. And the reason is when you take one of these whole grains or a vegetable or whatever, and you process it into something else, you lose the fiber. You lose what nature has provided us to slow down the absorption of each sugar. And so fiber-rich foods are really whole foods. And if you really have a difficult time understanding like what's a whole food, what's not a whole food, just look at it. If it looks like something that was man-made, it probably is, and it's probably not so great for you. If it looks like just quinoa, if it looks like just butternut squash, if it looks like just green beans, then it probably is really good for you. And if we make a really solid choice most of the time, we're going to be moving in the right direction. The question then becomes like, how do you find balance on a regular basis? Because you can't just eat vegetables. Like that's not what this book is about. It's really about finding the balance. So you really need to find fiber, fat, and protein. And the best way to do that is to take your dinner plate. And I would say put away those big dinner plates. Get yourself a salad plate, like the 9-inch ones. That's what we should all be eating off of so that we don't eat too much at one time. And divide that 9-inch plate in half. Half of the real estate on that plate should be dedicated to non-starchy vegetables. So things like, I don't know, everything from kale to Brussels sprouts, to cauliflower, to spinach, to any kind of salad green, to anything that floats your boat in the vegetable department. And then the other half should be dedicated in thirds to fat, to protein, and then to starchy vegetables. And starchy vegetables are things like squash, which is beautiful this time of year, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes. Corn's not a vegetable, it's a grain. But that floats in there too in that category. And if you don't like starchy vegetables, then you can pull in a whole grain. And a whole grain would be things like quinoa, farro, barley, brown rice, steel cut oats, that kind of stuff. Those other chunks, the remainder of that half the plate that's divided into thirds. So a third goes to starchy vegetables or whole grains. A third is going to go to fat. And it's really important the types of fat that we pull into our diet. We know that animal fats are really inflammatory. That's why steak is not so great for us. But if you're pulling in healthy fats, things like avocados, extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds, coconut can be a good fat in moderation. Those kinds of fats from plants actually decrease inflammation. And specifically, there are fats that are found in fish called omega-3 fatty acids. Those kinds of fats are really important to get into the diet. And so I'm a big believer in getting in like 1 or 2 times a week a fatty fish like salmon, black cod, halibut, sardines, and doing that from a wild source. And then that remaining third of the pizza pie, if you will, the plate, is dedicated to protein. And it's not that you can't eat animal protein. You totally can. I just don't want you eating it 3 times a day. And so thinking about other sources of of protein that come from plants can be really helpful. So things like beans and lentils and legumes, tofu, tempeh, edamame. I always say from organic soy is really important. Anything from an animal, anything from a soy source should be organic. And even thinking about, moderation with chicken and turkey and anything else that you might want to eat in the protein department. The reason that plant proteins are really powerful, as I always say, like they really work for us, meaning like they do more than just provide us protein. Chicken is great, right? Totally tasty, wonderful thing. However, it's just protein. It's not really doing anything else for you. It's kind of a neutral food in my book. It's not hurting you, but it's not really doing anything for you. When I think about beans, I hear beans and I think, oh my gosh, all of those phytonutrients, plus you get protein, plus you get a ton of fiber. So in one small little package, you get much more bang for your buck. And so you can see if you're doing this across many different plants, for instance, you may choose almonds for a snack. And you're like, this is the perfect snack because it's fiber, fat, and protein all in one little package. And for 150 calories, you get a really, really great little snack that's going to actually tide you over until dinner. Like that kind of choice works wonders for you. The other piece of this that's so intriguing and we're getting more information about every day is that we don't actually absorb all of the calories that we eat in the fiber rich foods because our microbiome, all the good little probiotics that live in our gut that help things along, actually eat some of those calories for us. So I read that like if you eat, say, a little handful of almonds, 150 calories of almonds, you only actually absorb like 130 of those calories, 120 or 130 of those calories because your microbiome is actually eating some of it. So you can see why that 150 calories of almonds is very different than the 150 calories that you might eat that say is the Halloween Skittles that are left over. And so choosing those fiber rich foods for ourselves really makes it work. Someone's asking in the audience, is there a bean that has more nutritional value over others? You know, there probably is some data out there about which one is the single best, but I'm a really big believer that variety is the spice of life. And so I actually get canned beans like online and have them shipped. And I keep a little store in the basement in our pantry, and I have all different kinds. I have adzuki beans, I have chickpeas, I have cannellini and black beans, pinto beans, red kidney beans. I have a whole bunch of ones, and that way I can sort of vary it up so that we're not eating the same food all of the time. But to my knowledge, there isn't one that really speaks so much louder than the others. What I do know is that when they've done research, longevity research in the blue zones, that people who eat beans live longer lives. Like that's definitely been studied. You know, I love canned beans, and I'll tell you what, my favorite brand is a brand called Eden Organic, and I'll tell you why. One of the reasons people don't do such a great job digesting beans is that they have, when you cook them or when you have them, they have phytic acid and some other really tough to digest things in them. And what Eden Organic does, and what you can do at home as well, is get this Japanese seaweed called kombu and actually put that in when you're cooking the beans. So if you prefer to cook from dried beans, obviously soaking them is very helpful. Even sprouting them can be helpful. And there's a blog post on my website about sprouting because it's really not difficult to do if you have a ball jar at home. And you know, cooking from dried beans is extremely inexpensive. So it's definitely a great money saver if you're, trying to make things meet in your budget at home. But if you are wanting to just spring for the can of beans, Eden Organic is a great one because they pressure cook and they pressure cook with kombu. So they're pressure cooking to actually decrease some of those tough to digest things. And then the enzymes in the kombu is breaking down some of the phytic acid. And so it makes it a whole lot easier for us to digest the beans. The other thing to know is that if you are following say you're following a standard American diet right now, and you're not really eating that many plants in your diet or plant forward sources of protein, you can't shift the needle like too fast. And so maybe if you're not eating any beans at all, maybe you only add half a cup a week and you kind of increase slowly over the course of time. So that gives your microbiome and your body time to adjust. If we don't give ourselves time to adjust, that's when we really feel like detox type symptoms, or we don't feel very well, or we get really bloated and we get more constipated instead of helping with our constipation when we're trying to pull more plants in. So it's important to make sure that we get those foods in, but that we ease into it. The body does not like sharp changes. Everything's slow and steady. Same thing with exercise. You go out and try to run 10 miles tomorrow, you're going to be hurting tomorrow afternoon. But if you take a walk and you do a little jog for 30 seconds, and next week you do it for a minute, and then 2 weeks later you do it for 5 minutes, like, yeah, maybe your body would adjust to a jog better that way. It's the same thing when it comes to our food. So that's kind of the nitty gritty on like how to balance a plate. Like I said, going back to the blood sugar stuff, this is really an important point. Our blood sugar over the course of the day really needs to be even Steven. But what happens to many of us is that we overdo it. And so our blood sugar will sort of spike. And then necessarily we have to secrete insulin in the body to bring the blood sugar back to normal. And so often our bodies will overshoot the insulin a little bit and the blood sugar will go too low. And then we'll feel really tired and cranky. So then we'll eat again. And we don't choose the best things. We choose whatever's convenient. Our blood sugar goes up and then it comes back down again and it goes up. And so you can see over the course of the day, it's like a big roller coaster of craziness, right? But if you start your day with some kind of beautiful, say you choose the butternut squash and spinach porridge, and you add some fat to it, and there's some protein in there as well, and you get this even secretion of your blood sugar matched with insulin, and then it comes back down to zero. And then you're hanging out, you feel really great, and then you have lunch, and then it goes back up again. And then you have a nice balanced lunch with some salad, with some topped with chicken and some avocado and a nice salad dressing. And then you feel really good and it comes back down. And then maybe you have a little snack in the afternoon, you go straight to dinner and you have a really delicious dinner. But you can see that you've given yourself periods through the day of digestive rest, time when you've not been busy digesting, but actually just coming back to zero. And also you have a better blood sugar insulin response. And overall, over the course of your lifetime, that will also prevent you from developing pre-diabetes or diabetes or metabolic syndrome, which is that disastrous combination of weight issues combined with high triglycerides, high blood pressure, and problems with the blood sugar. And that actually ends up plaguing a lot of people, somewhat due to genetics and a lot due to the choices that we make on a daily basis. So you can see if you start to make some of these decisions and actually move in a more positive direction going forward, your body rewards you and it keeps your blood sugar normal and it helps with your cholesterol metabolism, and you don't get as much weight deposition around your midsection, and things tend to work better for us in the long haul. But I could talk forever about food for sure. There are so many wonderful things in this book that I would just really love to share with you. I think the other couple of things I will add is that I know that we need to choose real foods for sure, but there are a couple of ways that you can just help yourself out, off the bat. And that is to choose things like water and actually hydrate yourself with real water. It's pretty common that I hear people like to doctor up their water with things like Crystal Light packets or electrolyte things, but just drink water. Go back to what your great grandmother was doing and just drink regular water. Do it in about 1 to 2 liters a day, and make sure that you're actually hydrating your body, because often we can misconstrue hunger signals when we're just thirsty. And make sure if you are hydrating that you're doing with just water, not with other things added in. So like I said, I'm not a big fan of like the electrolyte waters, other sugar sweetened beverages, because what we ultimately get are calories without the benefit of having any nutritional value and any fiber. And again, we lose out when we do that. Same thing happens when we drink juice. Juice is just sugar extrapolated from the fruit, but it doesn't have any of what nature intended us to have, which is the fiber along with the fruit. Another thing is don't drink too much coffee, but definitely enjoy your coffee if you like it. People ask me all the time, how much is an okay amount of coffee to have? And generally 1 to 2 cups a day is totally fine. Just don't doctor it up with like lots of sweeteners and stuff. Stay away from those non-nutritive sweeteners like Splenda, stevia, monk fruit. I don't believe in life that there's anything as such as a free lunch. And so I definitely wouldn't recommend using those at all. And I definitely wouldn't recommend sweetening your coffee with them, because I think our coffees can end up being sort of a glorified milkshake that we end up indulging in for several hours over the course of a morning, as opposed to a drink that we consume and then we're done with. The other thing I'll mention is alcohol. And a lot of people have questions about how much one is able to drink because there's conflicting information out there about that. But the best research that I'm able to put together is that if you're trying to optimize for cardiovascular disease, as well as decrease cancer risk, as well as prevent weight gain and perimenopausal symptoms like night sweats and hot flashes and like all the discomfort that can come along with that mid stage of life, it really is brace yourself. One drink a day for women, two for men, and optimally, really only 3 to 4 days per week or less. And so it's really not much. And I always joke that I'm drinking that one glass of wine or that one tequila cocktail so much differently than if I know that there's another one coming around the bend for me. So really cherish your alcohol if you just do decide to drink, but do that in moderation. Let's see, there's some more questions in here too. We can also open it up for verbal questions if you'd rather. Can I comment on how a plant-forward diet benefits not only our human health, but also the long-term health of our planet? Oh, this is a really great one. Thank you for asking that question. So, the reason to eat plants, of course, is that it helps our insides, but it also helps our environment, helps our outsides too. It's also less expensive. A great amount of energy, both in terms of finances, but also just in terms of like energy of people's time, land energy goes into raising livestock. And so, and also not to mention like all the like disgusting methane gas that they like let go because we're feeding them corn and not what they're supposed to be eating. And so it really is so much better for our environment. We decrease so many bad things, greenhouse, for everything from greenhouse emissions and gases to helping to nurture our land in a good way. It's always better to eat local if you can, if you know the farmer, if you're able to be part of a community shared agriculture program, if you're able to shop at a farmer's market where you don't have to go through the middleman. All of those kinds of things can be really helpful and decrease like just the tax of all of the choices that we make on our planet. And if you're choosing a lot of whole foods, you also necessarily are getting less packaging. Apples don't come really in packages. You just buy them loose, or you pick them from a tree at the local place when you go apple picking. And so you don't have to worry so much about all that extra packaging that also pollutes our poor earth. And so really paying attention to all these tiny choices that we make can really impact things for the better. But I think we lose track of that sometimes when we get a little trendy and start thinking about like, oh, everybody's eating plants, but we need to do that in a really smart way, because there are certainly ways not to do that very smartly. A question here on managing weight gain for women going through menopause. Oh, friend. The perimenopause is a really tough time of life. So I always joke that perimenopause is the best 7 to 10 years of your life. And just when you think it can't get any worse, then it gets worse. And then finally, one day it's over. So the way that it typically rolls on for most women is sometime in their 40s, we start to get an imbalance of estrogen and progesterone, and the periods start to become more heavy. They get closer together. They tend to be like kind of just clotty and gross and weird, and sometimes are really accompanied by a lot of different symptoms. And then those are generally our ovulatory periods, meaning that we're still ovulating, we're still releasing an egg from the ovary. It's just coming, it's not being followed by a specific amount of time on the back end. So that's why the periods get a little bit more close together. And then we move into the space of anovulation, where we stop ovulating regularly. And we end up getting these periods that are heavy and awful and gross because we go through a month or two with no cycling. And then all at once we have this breakthrough bleed. And those become erratic and very unpredictable and can be really awful, accompanied by symptoms that feel like one day, like we're having so many hot flashes and night sweats that like we could never get pregnant again. And then, literally 2 weeks later, feel like we're about to get our period any day and everything's feeling engorged and awful. And so it's this really big up and down. And this is all accompanied by other things like changes to our gums and teeth issues and muscle aches and joint aches and weight gain around the middle, especially because we don't have the protective effect of the estrogen, which generally keeps weight gain for women more in like the hips and the thighs, which is not as dangerous as the weight gain that happens around our bellies. And so it becomes really challenging to manage through perimenopause. Some of the stuff I've read is that our metabolic burn is like 65% of what it was when we were 20. And so a lot of the weight gain can be attributed to just simply like not moving enough and eating too much because our metabolism slows way down. The other problem I see with women is that we're not being attentive enough to strength training and we're not maintaining our lean muscle mass. Lean muscle mass works for us. It keeps our metabolism up and it keeps us strong and balanced and really together. And when we go through the menopause, we really start to replace. Our weight may not change that much, but for sure we are replacing some of our muscle with fat. And so our metabolism necessarily shifts. And so the thing that works in perimenopause or menopause is the stuff that you probably haven't done before. Because if you knew to do it, you probably already would be doing it. But it's a very specific attention to the proper amount of protein. It's really about finding balance of fiber, fat, and protein. And everybody's a little bit different, but starting with that plate balance is a nice place to start to figure out how that feels in your body. But it really comes down to eating smartly, potentially giving yourself more digestive rest in between meals, meaning more space in between the time that you're consuming calories. So, giving yourself a good healthy 4 hours between breakfast and lunch and a good healthy 3 to 4 hours before the next snack. And in a proper 12-hour rest, digestive rest overnight can be really helpful also. And so those kinds of tactics can get you started moving in the right direction. But I would say if you're struggling with weight and you don't have any issues with, blood pressure, your cholesterol, with blood sugar, with your thyroid, those kinds of things, like if you're seeing someone for that, then I would say reach out to an integrative medicine doctor because that could be a really good spend of your time. I have a person who's asking about choosing organic foods versus not. My quick and dirty on organic is that if I eat the outside of something, then I'm going to buy organic. And if I'm peeling it, then I don't worry as much. I personally think organic fruits and vegetables taste better. One big example of this in my life is celery. Celery, when you buy organic, tastes salty. It's really extremely crunchy. When I buy conventional celery, it just tastes like water to me. And there's a lot of flavor that can be conveyed into foods just by choosing really good fruits and vegetables. So that's kind of how I choose. You can also check out the Environmental Working Group. They put out some lists every year called the Clean 15, the Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen being the dirtiest vegetables and fruit that you definitely should eat organic, and the Clean 15 being the 15 cleanest ones that you could feel more comfortable eating conventional produce. But if your budget allows, like I said, I think organic tastes better, but you can also use the quick and dirty rule as well. Oh, someone's asking to repeat the type of doctor I said about menopause. I would reach out to an integrative physician, someone like me. Unfortunately, I don't have a license in Massachusetts, so I can't be your doctor. But if you know anyone who's in Connecticut or New York, I could be. But I'm sure there's an integrative medicine doctor that your friends or someone in your community would recommend to you. So I would reach out to the moms groups or Nextdoor or whatever you use to stay in touch with your neighbors or the people in your community, because almost guaranteed there's someone who's close to home for you. All right, I'm happy to take other questions too. People can come off.
I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the recording. So if anyone wants
Perfect.
to put yourself back on camera or not, or turn on your microphone and ask a question, Dr. Haiti can answer that way. So we're gonna go ahead and stop